Welcome to my sanctuary. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at an example of a conflict in the system Torchbearer. For this example, I will be referencing my copy of Torchbearer First Edition. There is a second edition out now, but according to my friend that has a copy of it, quote, it does look like 2E leaves the conflict rules basically the same, but as expected, there are a lot of clarifications of edge cases and some more detail in places, end quote. Additionally, it seems that 2E adds a social equivalent to might called precedence, but that shouldn't be relevant for today's example. So, if this conflict example excites you, and you want to try out the system, go ahead and pick up 2nd edition. It seems to be more of the same. We've talked a little bit about how conflicts work in Torchbearer in our previous video, How to Negotiate with a Goblin, but I won't assume that you've seen that video here. Before we begin, let's talk about what the system Torchbearer is in general. Torchbearer is a game about dungeon crawling. It has a lot of mechanical systems to organize dungeon delving, and compared to many popular modern games is grittier, more mechanically focused, and definitely deadlier. A lot of this comes down to the systematized dungeon turns, clarifying how long each action of exploration takes you in the dungeon. Every test, this system's term for a skill or attribute check, or roll, I should say, that one makes outside of a conflict, or a set of simultaneous tests in the case of multiple characters being caught in a poison gas trap or something like that, that's all happening at the same time, or any conflict takes one turn. Conflicts being our generalized, like an encounter with some monsters, whether that's a negotiation or a fight. Light sources, candles, torches, and lanterns all have limited number of turns that they last for, after which they burn out and must be discarded or refueled. Additionally, at the end of every 4th turn, the characters are subjected to the grind. When the grind happens, all characters gain a condition. If your character has no other conditions, they become hungry and thirsty. If a character is already hungry and thirsty, they become exhausted. If they're already exhausted and hungry, they become angry. If they are already angry, exhausted, and hungry and thirsty, then they become sick. If you're already all of those things, you become injured. If you're already angry, exhausted, hungry, sick, and injured, you're afraid. And if all of those are checked, and the 4th turn comes up and the grind happens, then you unceremoniously drop dead from exhaustion. Dead as a brick. These rules enforce to the players that the dungeon is an inherently inhospitable place. You'll see one additional condition on your character sheet here. Fresh. Fresh is a special beneficial condition. New characters always start with it, and it is possible to regain it when you set out from town on a new expedition, if you're leaving town with no ongoing negative conditions and pass a resources test. You paid all your bills. Fresh gives you a bonus on all tests until you gain any other condition, when it is then lost. So you'll be fresh for at most 4 turns, 4 dungeon turns, when you will automatically become hungry and thirsty from the grind, and therefore lose fresh. For this video, I'm not going to give you a full dungeon crawl. If I ever run a one-shot of this system in the future for my Twitch channel, I'll definitely link the VOD in the description here. I'm not currently planning such a thing, but if you want to see that, leave a comment, and maybe it'll happen sooner. Since we aren't giving you a full dungeon crawl, let's talk about the setup. We are going to take the 6 sample PCs from the book and put them into a conflict with an equal number of goblins. For this conflict, we are going to assume that the PCs have done a bit of dungeon delving already. They've made a few tests, things have gone well so far. They're no longer fresh, having become hungry and thirsty, but removed that condition with the supplies that they brought with them. They had some water or ate some rations, and so far have avoided gaining any other conditions. This is perhaps an optimistic start to assume, but it's a possible one, and it minimizes the complexity here. I'm going to briefly go over each of our PCs so that we can miss them when they are gone. I'll share with them their art from the book as well, because it's very nice. For each of them, I'll share their belief and instinct as well, so that we can get to know them. So we all understand what I mean by beliefs and instincts. These are the ways that the system helps flesh out your character and tells us more about who they are. Beliefs are mostly a role-playing aid. They tell you and everyone at the table what the character is about and what you want to explore in the game. It's more than a goal, which is something else you write at the start of a session, but a belief can describe the character's philosophy, obligations, loyalties, personal code, their outlook on the world. Playing to beliefs makes for a more interesting character, more interesting story, and you are rewarded for doing it. Instincts are different than beliefs. They are a simple action or reaction that the character takes in certain situations. These should be generally helpful, and a good instinct that helps the party gets you additional rewards at the end of a session. When a character's instinct is triggered, it allows them to take the described action without it taking a turn in the dungeon or spending a check, a resource which must be acquired over the course of the adventure in camp. You'll see in our sample characters how many of their instincts will be a great aid to the party, letting them take useful actions without spending the resource of time. Character beliefs and instincts can change over time. At the beginning or end of any session, you can choose to change your character's beliefs or instincts to represent the character's growth or a change of circumstances. Now, let us meet our doomed heroes. To start, we have Carolina, a human warrior from the remote village of Skoganby. She wears a fine bearskin cloak. She was orphaned but raised by Gundrun the Hunter. She is aligned to the forces of law and has a belief that she is the bulwark that stands between my friends and harm. Her instinct is always go hunting when we make camp. Her skills, wise, and traits suggest she is familiar with combat and danger, along with the wilds. Next, we have Baron of Karkaroth, a dwarf adventurer. Also an orphan, he was raised in a church. His belief is that there is naught for me but blood and treasure, spent and earned. But his instinct is to always look out for Carolina, implying some history between the two. When I played in a one-shot with these characters, we said that Baron was an old family friend of Carolina's adoptive family, and that she called him Uncle Baron. He's also a skilled fighter, but also a skilled orator and manipulator. He has a way with words when he needs. He seems educated and knows what things are worth. Then we have Taika, the elf ranger. Young for an elf, I believe, at 73 years of age. Her parents yet live and are teachers back in Elfland. She is cautious, with the belief the wise consider all angles before making a decision, and the instinct to always identify the capabilities of new creatures I encounter. As an elf ranger, they also know a few spells. We have Geralt, the halfling burglar. He's a jolly fellow. He believes, keep your spirits and head high, and good things will happen. And his instinct is to always prepare a meal when we camp. He's surely a joy to adventure with. His best skill is cooking, which can be a very important skill in Torchbearer, not to be underestimated. It lets you create meals out of a fewer number of rations. With inventory space at an extreme premium in this game, stretching your rations can be a major boon. We have Varg, the human magician, who believes care and thought will take one farther than reckless action. And he has the instinct to always map our progress when we camp. His cartography skill will be indispensable for his party in deep dungeons, and his spells provide many utilities to his party. Wisdom of Sages, letting him read or speak a foreign or alien tongue. Wizard Aegis spell allows him to defend himself and his allies in a conflict, and Thread of Friendship lets him turn enemies into allies. Though not directly powerful, he is a mighty asset to his team. I played Varg in a one-shot before, same one I mentioned earlier. He tragically ended up possessed by an evil spirit he tried to banish, but he lived, kind of. Ulrich, the cleric from the bustling city with his brilliant red tunic, to contrast, might seem out of place in a deep, dark dungeon. But he believes, I'll do whatever it takes to get ahead in this world, and I'll wear a smile doing it. He knows the dangers that lurk in old ruins. His instinct is to always check for traps before picking a lock, and he has the skills for it. Ulrich was an orphan in the city before being taken in by the Fleen the Healer, and raised in the church. But their thieving lifestyle is still buried beneath the surface. I would wonder what path Ulrich would take in a campaign. Would they be a shining example of redemption, or would they become a corrupt priest? Setting the stage now for the conflict. Our heroes are deep within the bowels of the earth. Darkness surrounds them. With a party of 6, they need at least 2 torches lit to prevent any of them from being in total darkness. Each torch provides light to 2 characters, and including the holder of the torch, of course, and dim light to another 2. Dim light allows you to act, but counts as a factor in all tests, making success more difficult. If the party had a lantern, this might be more efficient, providing light to 3 and dim light to 3 more, covering the whole party with just 1 light source. But lanterns are expensive, and none of them started with one. For now, I will assume that Carolina and Varg the Magician are carrying the torches. They are thus each in light, and during the conflict will provide light to Taika the Elf and Baron the Dwarf, as they are skilled fighters and will be the most effective in the conflict. All the other characters are in dim light. Carrying a torch occupies 1 hand, obviously, but Varg only needs 1 hand free to cast his spells. Carolina has a spear in 1 hand, but despite her art showing otherwise, she doesn't yet have a shield in her inventory, making her offhand free to hold the torch. A torch can be used as a weapon in a pinch, but it lacks any of the bonuses that proper weapons have, making it a poor substitute for a spear or a sword or any other proper killing device. The party is exploring the catacombs in an ancient ruin. Complete darkness outside the light of their torches, they encounter the campsite of a band of goblins. Looted items hoarded by the goblins lay scattered around. The goblins consider this their territory, and they make to attack the intruders, jumping from the darkness with weapons at hand. A violent conflict is going to begin. After determining that a conflict is about to begin, the first step is determining the type of conflict that this will be. The GM will make this decision based on the intent of the players. The GM should ask the players, what are you trying to accomplish, and how are you going about it? This decision is an important one, as the type of conflict determines the stakes of that conflict. If the PCs declare that they want to try and kill the goblins outright, they can do so. But they put their own lives on the line to do it. Should they lose the conflict, some or all of them may perish. Here we have the full list of conflict types. As you can see, not all conflicts are violent in nature. One might attempt to banish a spirit or demon in a conflict, or convince a crowd to be swayed to your side, or defeat an intelligent creature in a battle of riddles like Bilbo and Gollum from The Hobbit. For now, against angry goblins with weapons in hands, the PCs might choose to try and capture them, drive them off, kill them, or flee for their lives. The GM allows the players to discuss their intent. Fleeing, they decide, is right out. They're in good condition, this room is full of looted supplies that they would very much like to have. Baron's player announces that they should just kill them. They're just goblins. But the GM reminds the players that killing is always serious business. By engaging in a kill conflict, they are risking their lives, even if they win. Even if they win, they might lose one or more PCs if the goblins are able to force a mid-level or major compromise. We'll talk more about compromises at the end of the conflict. Carolina's players suggest we don't need to kill them, we just want their stuff. Let's just drive them off for now, and we can take what we can carry from their camp. The players mostly agree, but Varg's player adds, wait, consider, we could capture them. We disarm them, force them to surrender, we can loot their camp, and they know this place better than us. Maybe we can get them to tell us more about the dungeon. Taika's player reads over her character sheet and then says to the GM, my instinct is to always identify the capabilities of new creatures I encounter. Can I make a free check to maybe learn or know something about these goblins? The GM thinks for a moment. It is an instinct, so it allows for a free check at any time should it apply. The GM declares that goblins in their world are not unique or unknown monsters, and therefore a lore master skill test, which is a skill Taika possesses, might be able to know things about them. Checking the factors for lore master in the book, the GM sees that recall lore has the following factors. Each entry here adds 1 to the difficulty. Fairy and folk tales about goblins would be obstacle 1. The GM isn't sure that that would be enough for full knowledge. It makes a compromise with themselves, saying, alright, goblins are fairly common pests on the fringes of civilization, so make a lore master test, Taika. Obstacle 1 will be a success and let you recall some folklore about them. But if you get 2 successes, I'll tell you a bit more reliable information, and if you get, say, 4 successes, I'll just give you a copy of their stats from the book. As an aside, I'm pretty sure this sort of tiered success would be homebrewery, but it's how I would handle this situation as a professional game master, so I'm putting it in my example. Taika here has a lore master skill of 3, so she would roll 3 6-sided dice. Every 4 or greater, so 4, 5, or 6 rolled on the die, that is a success. Anything else is a failed die. So she needs 1 success to get the basic obstacle the GM set here to learn folklore about the goblins. Since she's acting on instinct, no one else in the party could help her on this check. If this was a test being made outside of an instinct, it's possible multiple characters could compare notes and work together on it. But in this case, unless they have a comparable instinct, Taika's on her own. 3 dice have pretty good odds of getting at least 1 success. 2 isn't particularly unlikely, but 4 successes is obviously impossible on just 3 dice. There are some options that Taika can involve to change the odds on her rolls by spending various resources. Every character has abilities called wises, which represent certain areas of knowledge and understanding outside of the context of skills. If Taika had a relevant wise, she could spend a fate point to reroll a single failed die related to her wise, or spend a persona point to reroll all failed dice on the single test. But her wises are Elven lore and Trax wise. Neither would be relevant here. But even if they were, a starting character starts with no fate or persona points. These must be earned in play. So that doesn't help her anyway. She could invoke a trait. Traits come in levels that determine how often they can be invoked for the character's favor. All Taika has are level 1 traits as a starting character, meaning she can use them each once per session to add +1 die to an appropriate test. You can also use a trait to hinder yourself, giving yourself -1 die, or to give an opponent +2 dice in a versus test. Or you can use it to break a tie in your opponent's favor. Why would you want to do this? Well, when you do this, you earn a resource called a check. Checks are a resource that you spend during the camp phase to take helpful actions. If you don't have any checks to spend, you can only help others, act on instinct, or collapse into your bedroll when the party makes camp. You can give your checks to other PCs. They belong to you, but they're a party resource in that way. So if Taika earns a check, she could give it to Baron during camp phase if he needed a check to make an armorer skill test to repair his helmet. Or she could give it to Geralt so that he can make a cooking test to preserve the fresh rations that the party gathered so that they won't spoil upon returning to town. Or to give any PC an attempt to recover from a condition. They're essential resource to collect. A good time to gather checks is against low obstacle tests you're likely to pass, even with the hindrance, such as if you have a lot of help or you just have a very high skill and it's a very low obstacle test. Or on tasks that you were certain or almost certain to fail anyway. If you need to make an obstacle 4 test with 2 dice, you might as well hinder yourself with a trait if you can justify it and earn a check alongside your failure. Additionally, one's skills in Torchbearer improve through use, but improvement requires a number of both successes and failures. So failing isn't all bad. Let's look at Taika's traits. She has the traits Firstborn from being an elf, and she has the trait Fiery. Let's see what those are about. Firstborn says, elves were the first to awake in the world and wandered beneath the stars, long before the coming of dwarves or men. The trees and the stars recognize them as kin, and they are often possessed of special insight that comes of their memories of the dawn of the world. But their long lives can often make them seem remote and detached from younger peoples. While the Fiery trait reads, fiery souls know how to stir up a crowd, but they are quick to anger. So, putting myself in the player's shoes for a moment, I can see that how both of these traits could be invoked depending on what Taika's player wants to do. Firstborn is all about the age of the elves and their memories from the dawn of the world. Taika's had a long time to have learned and encountered goblins before. She could easily use her once per session beneficial invoke on that trait to claim +1 die on the Loremaster test. That would take her from 3 to 4 dice. She might get the 4 success result. Still not likely, but she might. Fiery here could be invoked to gain a check here, penalizing themselves. Taika's player could say something like, while her instinct is to remember what she knows, seeing them brandish weapons triggers her fiery nature, and she reaches for her own weapon. -1 die, and I gain a check. She'd still get to roll her 2 remaining dice, and it's decent odds of getting that 1 success for the folklore result. And she might get 2. There is one additional mechanic that Taika could use to get a bonus on a roll, and that's a mechanic called Tapping Your Nature, which allows a character to perform a heroic act, getting an often large bonus to a single roll by adding their nature attribute. There's a lot we could say about nature and the various ways it could be used, or how it fluctuates over time as you tax and recover it. But Taika can't tap her nature right now because doing so requires spending a persona point, which she does not have. So for now, you can't help her. Taika decides that she doesn't need a great success here, and this is a good opportunity to gather a check that the party will surely need later. She describes the conflict between her instinct to overthink and her fiery nature ready to fight these goblins. This is a risk. Failing a test never just means you don't get what you want. When a test is failed, the GM always applies a condition to your character, or introduces a twist to the scene. Failing this check might impact Taika directly in a negative way, such as making her afraid of these unknown monsters. Or the GM might choose to invoke a twist and add a new aspect to the scene that's uncovered, like perhaps a stronger leader of the goblins emerges from around the corner. But Taika is willing to make the check. She rolls 2 dice, 3 from her Loremaster skill, -1 for the negative trait, and she rolls a 5 and a 6. 2 successes. A very lucky roll. Taika's player notes the success on her Loremaster skill on her sheet. Gathering successes and failures is how you improve a skill. The GM nods, looking over the goblin stats again, and he says, well, you know in folklore, goblins are always depicted as untrustworthy and dangerous. With 2 successes, I'll also say that goblins are cowardly creatures, not wanting a stand-up fight, but if cornered and forced, will fight hard for their lives. They also have the instinct to always lie. With that information, the party decides that questioning the goblins won't be useful, as they won't be able to trust any information the goblins give them, and so they decide to simply drive them off, so they can loot the goblins' camp. A drive-off conflict begins. Once the intent and type of conflict has been set, the next step is to generate the disposition of each side and to determine the conflict captain. Disposition can be thought of as the HP of each side in the conflict. It's a shared resource of the entire side, which is divided up by the involved characters as HP. A character must have some disposition in order to take part in the conflict. Disposition is lost from your opponent's actions, but can be regained through the defend action in a conflict, allowing a party that is losing to attempt to regroup. The conflict captain is nominated by the players and serves as the leader for this conflict. They are responsible for rolling disposition and are the ones who ultimately choose and distribute actions for their side, with the input of their fellow players, of course. When you generate disposition, you roll a skill and add the successes on that skill to the level of an attribute. Since this is a drive-off conflict, the conflict captain will need to roll fighter and add health. They will get a bonus 1 die to the roll for each PC that can help with the roll, as usual. Baron of Karkaroth, the dwarven adventurer of this party, is the toughest son of a bitch the party has to offer, with a health of 5 and a fighter skill of 4, barely beating out Carolina's equal skill and 4 health. So the party follows the dwarf's lead, electing him conflict captain. Each PC taking part in the conflict can help here. Helping a skill like this requires the character to have an applicable skill. In this case, only the fighter's skill really applies. Or you can help if you have a relevant wise, even if you don't have the correct skill. Of their 5 other party members, everyone has some level of fighter skill, except for Varg the wizard. Varg, however, has studied tactics and has skirmish wise on his sheet. His player describes Varg using this to shout out tactical advice and position himself strategically, helping the fighter test to determine the disposition. So Baron, with a roll of 4 dice for his fighter skill, plus 5 dice for the help of his allies, and he will add the successes rolled to his health of 5 to get his side's disposition. I rolled my 9d6, I got 6 successes. The PC side has a total of 6 plus 5 for 11 disposition. GM-controlled monsters work a little differently. They have a starting disposition based on the type of conflicts. Goblins start with a 3 disposition, a drive-off conflict, but would have a 6 if this was a kill conflict. If involved in a type of conflict not listed on their character sheet, they can roll nature to generate their initial disposition. If the conflict type is one of their listed ones, additional monsters beyond the first can add 1 to the disposition, helping automatically gaining a success. If it's not a listed one, they instead add 1 die to the nature roll. Since we have 6 goblins here, the first one generates 3 disposition, and each helper adds 1, for a total of 8 disposition for the 6 goblins. Once disposition has been determined, each side, the GM and the conflict captain, must divide up the disposition for their side between all members of their side which is participating in this conflict. The disposition must be divided up as evenly as possible, with excess being assigned at the discretion of the conflict captain or the GM. At a table, I would say use coins or stones or some physical tokens to represent this. In this case, the party has 6 members, 11 disposition. That's enough for everyone to have 2 HP except for 1 unlucky soul. Baron decides to give only 1 to Varg, the wizard, as he lacks the fighter skill and they probably don't need his magic in this conflict. At least he hopes he doesn't. For the goblins, they have 8 to divide up among 6. So goblins 1 and 2 are going to have 2 HP, the rest will have 1. Now, the first round begins. At the start of each round, All players, including the GM, must declare what weapons they are using, including spells, prayers, and shields. For the PCs, Carolina brandishes a spear, Baron their sword, Taika a dagger, Gerald the sling and stone, Varg, not wanting to use a spell yet, his dagger, and Ulrich his shield. The GM declares that the goblins brandish a mix of polearms and bows. Goblins 1, 3, and 4 have polearms. Goblin 2, 5, and 6 have bows. Each type of weapon gives a specific bonus to a specific type of action, and some have other special features. A bow, for example, gives +2 dice if the wielder makes the maneuver action, while a polearm gives +1 die to defend or feint actions. Choosing a certain weapon might telegraph the strategy that their side might use. This can be important as we go forward. Each round of a conflict in Torchbearer covers 3 opposing actions. The GM and the conflict captain will each secretly select 3 actions, including which character is performing them and the order that they are to be performed in. It's important that you select 3 and reveal them one at a time. Once an action has been revealed, you describe what the character is doing along with appropriate help actions, and then make the appropriate test. There are 4 types of actions: attack, defend, feint, and maneuver. They interact in a complex rock, paper, scissors sort of way. Attack tries to damage the enemy's disposition directly. Defend tries to restore your own disposition. Maneuver tries to set you up for a bonus on your next roll or apply a penalty to your foe's next action. Feint is a risky move that strongly defeats the defend action, but is smashed by an attack action. The GM should select their 3 actions first, preferably placing 3 face-down cards with their actions on them in front of them, or otherwise writing them down. Once the GM commits, the players can then freely discuss their strategy together, safe in the knowledge that the GM can't change the monster's plans, and pick their 3 actions, with the conflict captain making the final call. The GM secretly makes the following decisions. Looking at the goblins, what they're good at, they see that they have the most dice if they make a maneuver action when they use their bow. So they're going to start with that. Action 1, Goblin 2 makes a maneuver. Assuming that goes well, then it might be a good time to attack. Action 2, Goblin 4 makes an attack. And lastly, seeing the goblin's polearm gives them +1 die for a feint, the GM decides that it might be fun to throw a risky move into their plan. If the PCs attack into it, they'll certainly slaughter the goblins at that point, but if they're playing cautiously, the tricky buggers might get a surprise off on them. So, Action 3, Goblin 1 feints. The GM places cards with this information face down in front of them, and the PCs begin to strategize. The PCs can see from the stones on the table that they have more disposition than their foe, and they don't believe the goblins to be particularly fearsome. So after a round of discussion, they decide on a mostly offensive strategy, with some room to regroup at the end if things somehow go poorly. Action 1, Baron will attack. Action 2, Carolina will attack. And Action 3, Ulrich will defend, letting them regroup before the next round, is their hope. With both sides' actions set, the GM calls for Action 1 to be revealed. Goblin maneuvers against Baron's attack. We compare attack to maneuver on the action table, and we see a V for a versus test. This means both sides will roll their dice, count their successes, and compare them. Only the side with more successes will make progress, with the progress being determined by that margin of success. For the PCs to make an attack, they will roll fighter skill for this type of conflict. Because Baron is making the action, it is his fighter skill which must be rolled this time. But the rest of the party can help him, as with any other test, so long as they still have HP to take part in the conflict. Again, with Baron's 4 fighter skill and 5 allies helping, Varg once again using skirmish wise, and everyone else using their own fighter skill, players would describe what they are doing to help. what it looks like, and then give Baron's player their die. Baron is now rolling a solid 9 dice. Baron's weapon is a sword. Swords have a unique trait that allows them to add +1 die to any of the 4 action types. But once that bonus has been applied in a given conflict, it cannot change. Baron decides to dedicate his sword to attacking for this conflict and gets +1 die in his attack. Lastly, Baron's player knows that starting this conflict off in the party's favor is important. An early lead will likely ensure victory for their side. So they look at their traits and they see that they have the trait Scarred. Baron's player says, Baron is a veteran of many battles. This is just another one in a long line of bloody conflicts. Unfearing injury or pain, he steps forward, brandishing his sword aggressively. I'm using his Scarred trait for a +1 die on this roll. This would give him a total of 11 dice. 4 for fighter skill, +5 for help, +1 for his sword, +1 for his Scarred trait. For the goblins, monsters don't have skills per se. Instead, every monster stat block has a nature value that they use whenever they are acting within their nature. Or they use half that value if forced to act contrary to their nature for some reason. Fighting is in a goblin's nature, so they roll 3 nature. They roll their 3 nature. Additionally, all the other goblins are helping, so that's an extra 5 dice for help from the 5 other goblins. And lastly, Goblin 2 is wielding a bow, which adds +2 dice to maneuver actions, which this is. So adding all that up, the goblins are rolling 10 dice. Rolling for Baron first, I get an above average roll of 8 successes. Remember, each die rolled is a d6, 4 or greater is a success. So basically each die has a 50% odds of success. The goblins rolled their 10 dice, and I rolled 5 successes for them. So the party is starting off to a good start. Their margin of victory is 3 over the goblins. Since this was an attack, their margin of victory is subtracted from the disposition of the goblins. Also, this is a success for Baron for the purpose of advancing his fighter skill. When his side suffers damage like this, the acting character always takes damage first, with any overflowing damage being dealt to additional characters in the order chosen by their conflict captain, the GM in the case of monsters. Before we apply damage, though, the goblins have one ploy they can use to reduce the damage. All the goblins are wearing leather armor. When a character in leather armor is targeted by a successful or tied attack or feint action in a fight, you can roll a single die. On a success, they reduce the damage by 1. But they can only use this feature once per conflict. The GM rolls a d6 for Goblin 2, rolls a 2, that's a failure, no help from his armor today. So the goblins are taking 3 damage. This takes out Goblin 2, who is acting here, and had 2 hit points. With 1 point of damage left over, the GM applies it to Goblin 1, who also had 2 hit points, now reduced to 1 hit point. So he's taken damage, but he is still up. 1 goblin, Goblin 2, has been taken out. Since Goblin 2 has no remaining hit points, he cannot participate in the conflict. He can't take actions, and he cannot help his allies. But he isn't entirely removed from the board yet. A defend action could restore Disposition to his side and let him regroup. For now, the GM describes him fleeing from Baron's charge and hovering in the back, ready to book it into the deeper caves. Next, the GM calls to reveal Action 2. The goblins attack, led by Goblin 4, who has a polearm. The PCs reveal Attack with Carolina. On the action table here, we can see that attack versus attack is an I, an independent test. This is a dangerous situation. Both sides make their attack and deal damage to the disposition of the other side directly. Both sides deal damage, both sides take damage. It is possible in this case for both sides to wipe each other out, where the result is a tie, and both sides need to make major compromises to the other. A very dangerous situation. Adding up Carolina's pool, she has 4 fighter skill, plus 5 help from her friends, exactly as before. Her weapon is a spear, but that doesn't help her with an attack maneuver. or attack action. It gives a bonus to maneuver, or to defend if the narrative is of a narrow place. It does, however, bypass leather armor, so if she deals any damage, goblins won't be able to reduce it. That's something, at least. The player describes Carolina heroically rushing to the front, stabbing with her spear and fighting alongside her Uncle Baron, invoking her Heart of Battle trait for the once per session +1 die. Rolling 10 dice, she gets 6 successes. Because this is an independent test against an effective obstacle of 0, Carolina does not earn any marks towards advancing her fighter skill, but 6 successes will take out the goblins. But again, these two attacks are independent and happen simultaneously. The goblins still get to make their attack as well, before the damage is applied. 3 nature from the acting goblin, plus 4 help from the still fighting goblins, the one with the 0 disposition no longer can help, gives them 7 dice. I roll 3 successes. 3 successes won't take out the party, but the remaining disposition for a side matters when accessing compromises. So, Carolina rolls her leather armor to try and reduce the damage. She rolls 1 die, gets a 5, a success. With that armor, her side only takes 2 damage. This still takes Carolina out of the conflict, but there is no overflow. No one else gets hurt. The goblins are taking 6 damage. Because Carolina used a spear that bypasses leather armor, they can't reduce the damage. 1 damage takes out the acting goblin. The 5 overflow damage is enough to take out the remaining 4 goblins. They are all reduced to 0. The PCs win the conflict. Because they win, they accomplish their intent of driving off the goblins. The GM describes, seeing they are clearly outmatched with the furious attacks from your party, the goblins scurry into the dark, fleeing deeper into the caves with only their weapons in hand and clothes on their back. The rest of their camp lays out before you. But before they can get to the looting, we must look at the compromises. Since the party was missing some of its disposition, 2 out of the 11 that they had, they must make a compromise. Compromises come in 3 levels. Minor compromises, where you've lost a little disposition. A compromise, where you've lost about half of your disposition. And a major compromise, where the winner had only a few points remaining. Fortunately for the party, they only need to make a minor compromise here. The whole group at the table should approve the compromise. If the loser proposes a compromise that everyone complains is too much or inappropriate, the loser should change their terms. If, however, a consensus cannot be reached, the GM can approve one. This negotiation takes place as table chatter, a conversation between the players, not their characters. Baron and Carolina are not negotiating with the goblins, it's their players negotiating with the GM on the nature of the narrative compromise. Since this is only a minor compromise, the GM proposes that they simply suffer a pass of the grind, the process by which the dungeon slowly exhausts the PCs we discussed at the beginning of the episode. If the goblins had earned a higher ranks compromise, the GM might have said one or more of them suffered the injured or exhausted condition, or had the goblins sound an alarm, ready to return soon with reinforcements. But for a minor compromise, this seems fair enough to me. The PCs agree and each become hungry and thirsty. They will need to eat rations or drink something to recover. The GM then immediately marks a turn on the turn tracker. Any conflict always takes 1 dungeon turn, the unit of time we use to measure time passing in the dungeon. If the PC's torches expire, they'll need to light new ones, and if this is the 4th turn, the grind happens. Assuming it is now, since they are all now hungry and thirsty from the conflict, when the grind happens at the end of the turn, they're now also exhausted, making everything they do just a little bit harder. The GM smiles evilly. Hopefully the goblin's loot is worth it. And that brings us to the end of our Torchbearer conflict example. In this case, the PCs were lucky that they won when they did. Had it gone another action, the goblins' feint would have flanked their defend action, and they'd have been in real trouble. But, fortunately for them, goblins aren't so tough. I have really enjoyed looking back on Torchbearer. In fact, I actually just ordered the 2nd edition books for myself. I've never run it myself, but I have played a couple of games of it before, and writing this example has really excited me to run it sometime soon. If I do so, it will be on my Twitch channel. Twitch VODs are all saved on my other YouTube channel, and if I do stream it in the future, I'll link that particular VOD in the description below. If you like this video, please like and subscribe and hit the bell. There will be more TTRPG content coming. Next time, I think we're going to tackle a controversial bit of game mastering advice. You don't want to miss that. And check out my links below. You'll see a link to all my streaming content, as well as links to my Start Playing page, where you can sign up and play in one of my TTRPGs. Right now, I'm trying to get a new D&D 5e game off the ground, so come check that out. If you want to see more goblin slaying in different systems, check out my first 2 videos on this channel, How to Slay a Goblin, Parts 1 and 2. Part 1 should be on screen right now. Go ahead and click the link. Thank you for your time, and have a great day.